Case 1. Félix Verdejo. The pathologist testified that Keishla Rodriguez Ortiz was still alive when she hit the water. She had been drugged with fentanyl and a horse sedative, beaten, bound with metal wire, and tied to a concrete block before being thrown from the Teodoro Moscoso Bridge into the San Jose Lagoon in San Juan, Puerto Rico. The man who put her there was Félix Verdejo Sanchez, a 28-year-old professional boxer who had represented Puerto Rico at the 2012 London Olympics and had once been hailed as the island's next great boxing champion. Keishla was 27 years old and pregnant with Verdejo's child. He killed her because he saw the pregnancy as a threat to his marriage and his stalled boxing career. On April 29, 2021, Verdejo and an accomplice carried out a murder so brutal that it sparked mass protests across Puerto Rico and reignited demands for stronger protections against gender-based violence. Félix Verdejo Sanchez was born on May 19, 1993, and raised in San Juan. He became a professional boxer and competed in the 2012 Summer Olympics in London, representing Puerto Rico in the lightweight division. Known by the nickname El Diamante, the Diamond, Verdejo built a professional record of 27 wins and 2 losses with 17 knockouts. Between 2015 and 2017, he held the World Boxing Organization Lightweight Championship belt. Many believed he could follow in the footsteps of Puerto Rican boxing legends like Miguel Cotto and reach the top of the sport. His career, however, began to stall after a motorcycle accident set him back. His last fight took place on December 12, 2020, at the MGM Grand Conference Center in Las Vegas. He was knocked out in the 9th round by Japan's Masayoshi Nakatani in a bout broadcast on ESPN. It was a devastating loss. At 28 years old, Verdejo's boxing career was in decline. He was married with 1 daughter, and to the public, he appeared to be a devoted family man. What the public did not know was that Verdejo had been involved in an on-and-off relationship with Keishla Rodriguez for 11 years. When she became pregnant with his child in early 2021, Verdejo made a decision that would destroy both their lives. Keishla Marlene Rodriguez Ortiz was 27 years old and worked as a pet groomer. She had been in a relationship with Félix Verdejo for 11 years, a connection that stretched back to their teenage years. Her mother, Kayla Ortiz Rivera, described her as kind, a good daughter and sister, and someone who always wanted to help others. She loved animals and had built a life caring for them. Her family adored her. In early 2021, Keishla learned she was pregnant with Verdejo's child. She told her family about the pregnancy over the phone, and they were supportive. Verdejo, however, was not. He pressured her to get an abortion. She refused. On April 29, 2021, Keishla contacted Verdejo to discuss the pregnancy. It would be the last conversation she would ever have. On April 29, 2021, Félix Verdejo lured Keishla Rodriguez into his vehicle under the pretense of talking. Waiting with him was Luis Antonio Cadiz Martinez, a 23-year-old dual Canadian-American citizen who had agreed to help Verdejo carry out the murder. Once Keishla was inside the vehicle, Verdejo punched her. He and Cadiz Martinez then injected her with a substance that investigators initially believed to be heroin. An autopsy later revealed that Keishla had been given fentanyl and xylazine, a sedative used on horses and other large animals. While she was incapacitated, the 2 men bound her hands and feet with metal wire and tied her body to a concrete block. Verdejo then drove to the Teodoro Moscoso Bridge in San Juan. Security cameras from the bridge, Kennedy Street, Pradera Street, and several nearby locations captured portions of the crime. Cell phone data, toll booth cameras, and Auto Expresso records placed Verdejo at the scene. In broad daylight, Verdejo and Cádiz Martínez threw Keishla Rodriguez, still bound to the concrete block, from the Teodoro Moscoso Bridge into the San Jose Lagoon below. Verdejo then jumped into the water himself and fired shots, an act prosecutors described as an effort to finish murdering both Keishla and her unborn child. The pathologist who performed the autopsy testified at trial that Keishla Rodriguez was still alive when she entered the water. She drowned while tied to the block, unable to free herself. On April 29, 2021, Kayla Ortiz Rivera reported her daughter missing to authorities. A 3-day search began. Initially treated as a rescue mission, the effort shifted to a recovery mission when evidence suggested Keishla was no longer alive. On May 1, 2021, her body was discovered in the San Jose Lagoon in Carolina, Puerto Rico. Days later, Cádiz Martínez made an anonymous 911 call providing the location of Keishla's remains. On May 2, 2021, Félix Verdejo surrendered to federal authorities at the United States District Court in Hato Rey, Puerto Rico. He was charged with carjacking resulting in death, kidnapping resulting in death, and killing of an unborn child. Cádiz Martínez was also arrested and charged. Both men were held without bond at the Guayanbo Metro Detention Center. Federal prosecutors initially considered pursuing the death penalty, but removed that option on January 31, 2022. The maximum sentence under Puerto Rico law became 99 years per count. The case ignited outrage across Puerto Rico. Protesters took to the streets demanding accountability and stronger protections for victims of domestic violence and femicide. A shrine was erected on the Teodoro Moscoso Bridge in Keishla's memory. The anger was palpable and widespread. The trial began on June 20, 2023, in the United States District Court for the District of Puerto Rico in Hato Rey. Judge Pedro A. Delgado Hernandez presided over the proceedings. United States Attorney W. Stephen Muldrow led the prosecution. Verdejo's defense team consisted of attorneys Jason Gonzalez and Gabriela Cintron. The trial lasted 25 weeks and was closely watched across Puerto Rico and beyond. In November 2022, Luis Antonio Cádiz Martínez had pleaded guilty to 2 charges related to the murder in exchange for a plea deal. He faced a recommended sentence of 30 years to life, with formal sentencing scheduled for May 1, 2024, the 2-year anniversary of the discovery of Keishla's body. At trial, Cádiz Martínez testified against Verdejo. He told the jury that Verdejo had pressured Keishla to get an abortion before deciding to kill her. He recounted the day of the murder in detail, how Verdejo had punched Keishla, how they had injected her with drugs, how they had tied her to the concrete block, and how they had thrown her from the bridge in broad daylight. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Cell phone data and GPS tracking placed Verdejo at the scene. Security footage from toll booths and nearby businesses captured his movements. Text messages between Verdejo and Keishla documented their relationship and her pregnancy. The autopsy results confirmed the presence of fentanyl and xylazine in her system. The pathologist's testimony that Keishla had been alive when she entered the water was among the most damning pieces of evidence presented. Keishla's family testified about the devastating loss. Her mother, Kayla Ortiz Rivera, her sister Berenice, and her aunt Angeline Ortiz all took the stand and described Keishla as a loving, kind person who had been excited about becoming a mother. The defense argued that Cádiz Martínez had manipulated his testimony and shifted all the blame onto Verdejo. They claimed that Verdejo had not directly participated in the murder. The jury was not convinced. On July 28, 2023, after hearing weeks of testimony, the jury returned a verdict. Verdejo was found guilty on 2 of the 4 charges: kidnapping resulting in death and intentionally killing an unborn child. The jury could not reach unanimous verdicts on the charges of carjacking resulting in death and discharging a firearm during a violent crime. The conviction on the kidnapping charge carried a mandatory sentence of life in prison. On November 3, 2023, Judge Pedro A. Delgado Hernandez sentenced Félix Verdejo to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. United States Attorney W. Stephen Muldrow addressed the court and the public, stating, "We stand firmly with the family of Keishla Rodriguez Ortiz and all those in the community who sought justice for this senseless, cruel, and heinous act of premeditated and cold-blooded violence against Keishla and her unborn child." FBI San Juan Special Agent in charge Joseph Gonzalez added, "There are damages which cannot ever be repaired, not even by a just verdict." Verdejo's defense team filed a motion for a new trial, alleging that Cadiz Martinez had lied during the trial at the instruction of his attorney. The motion was denied. All post-trial motions have been rejected. Verdejo remains in a United States federal penitentiary with no possibility of parole. He will spend the rest of his life in prison. At 32, Félix Verdejo sits in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of parole. He will never be released. Keishla Rodriguez Ortiz and her unborn child were murdered because Félix Verdejo decided that their lives were less important than his reputation. The case sparked massive protests in Puerto Rico, demanding better protection for victims of domestic violence and gender-based violence. The shrine on the Teodoro Moscoso Bridge, where Keishla was thrown to her death, still stands. Her family continues to mourn a daughter, sister, and aunt whose life was stolen along with the child she was carrying. Verdejo's Olympic past has become a footnote to his crime. Case 2. James Snook. A prescription bottle with his name on it was found near the body. That single piece of evidence connected an Olympic gold medalist and respected university professor to the brutal murder of a 24-year-old medical student in June 1929. James Howard Snook had won 2 gold medals for the United States at the 1920 Olympics in pistol shooting and had spent years building a distinguished career at Ohio State University. He was a married father, a pillar of his community, and the inventor of a surgical tool still used in veterinary medicine today. He was also the man who bludgeoned Theora Hicks to death with a ball-peen hammer and then slit her throat with a pocket knife. The crime ended a 3-year affair, destroyed his family, and made him the only United States Olympic gold medalist ever executed for murder. James Howard Snook was born on September 17, 1879, in West Lebanon, Ohio, to a family of well-to-do farmers. He attended Ohio State University and graduated from the College of Veterinary Medicine in 1908. After a brief stint teaching at Cornell, he returned to Ohio State in 1910 and joined the faculty of the Veterinary College, where he became a full professor in 1921. He specialized in equine surgery and developed the Snook hook, a small surgical instrument designed to assist with spaying dogs and cats. The device is still in use today. In 1920, Snook represented the United States at the Summer Olympics in Antwerp, Belgium, where he competed as a member of the pistol team. He won gold medals in both the 30-meter team military pistol event and the 50-meter team pistol competition. On September 11, 1922, he married Helen Marple, a 6th-grade teacher from Newark, at the King Avenue United Methodist Church in Columbus. The couple had one daughter, Mary, who was born in 1924. Those who knew Snook described him as meticulous and fastidious. He insisted on impeccably clean clothing and maintained a reputation for order and consistency in both his professional and personal life. By all outward appearances, he was a man of accomplishment and stability. That image concealed a secret affair that had been ongoing for 3 years. Theora Kathleen Hicks was 24 years old and enrolled as a medical student at Ohio State University at the time of her death. She worked part-time as a stenographer in the College of Veterinary Medicine to support her studies. She was the daughter of Melvin Hicks, a school principal and textbook author, and Joanna Hicks, a homemaker who had conceived Theora at the age of 41 after years of being unable to have children. Her parents considered her a gift from God. Theora was pursuing a medical degree at a time when women made up only about 4% of American physicians. She was described as outspoken and ahead of her time, with progressive views on relationships that were considered shocking in conservative 1920s Columbus. She had her whole future ahead of her when she met James Snook. The affair began in 1926 when Snook was 46 years old, and Theora was working as a stenographer in his department. On a rainy day, Snook offered Theora and a friend a ride. A week later, he offered Theora alone a ride in the country. The relationship developed from there. For 3 years, Snook and Hicks maintained a clandestine relationship, renting a room at 24 Hubbard Avenue in the Short North District of Columbus, where they met regularly. Hicks also had another lover for part of that time, a recent Ohio State graduate. By June 1929, Snook had decided to end the relationship. He was planning a family trip with his wife and daughter, and Hicks had become a liability he could no longer manage. On the night of June 13th, 1929, Snook and Hicks drove to a remote area near the New York Central Railroad Pistol Range, northwest of Columbus, a location known locally as Shirt Tail Alley. Snook later claimed that Hicks demanded he cancel his upcoming trip with his family and threatened to harm his wife and child if he refused. An argument erupted. Snook grabbed a ball-peen hammer from the back seat of his 1929 Ford Coupe and struck Hicks in the head 3 or 4 times. When he realized what he had done, he took out his pocket knife and slit her throat, severing her jugular vein. He later testified that he did so to prevent her from suffering a prolonged and painful death. After killing her, he panicked. He drove away from the scene and threw her purse into the Olentangy River. On June 14th, 1929, Theora Hicks was reported missing by her roommates, Beatrice and Alice Buston, when she failed to return home or attend her classes. Later that same day, 2 16-year-old boys, Paul Krumlauf and Milton Miller, discovered her body in the remote field near the pistol range. She was found partially clothed in a blood-soaked dress with severe head trauma, a fractured skull, and a severed jugular vein. The identification was swift. Near the body, investigators found a prescription bottle with James Snook's name on it. The roommates confirmed the affair when questioned by police. Snook was brought downtown and interrogated for hours. Prosecutor John J. Chester Jr. led the questioning. At one point, Chester physically struck Snook, leaving red welts on both of his cheeks. Snook did not confess immediately. It was only after multiple beatings, and after learning that Ohio State University had fired him for having an affair with a student, that Snook signed a full confession admitting to first-degree murder. He was charged and held for trial. The trial took place in the summer of 1929 in Franklin County, Ohio, before Judge Scarlett. Prosecutor John J. Chester Jr. led the case for the state, relying heavily on Snook's signed confession and forensic evidence that detailed the savage nature of the attack. The defense team consisted of attorneys John F. Seidel, a former Columbus municipal judge, E.O. Ricketts, and Max Seifert of Circleville. Snook pleaded temporary insanity and self-defense, He claimed that Hicks had attacked him with a hatchet during the roadside argument and that he had struck her in self-defense before slitting her throat to end her suffering. He took the stand and gave explicit testimony about their sexual relationship. The testimony was so graphic that none of Columbus's 3 newspapers would print the details. An enterprising court stenographer compiled an uncensored account of the testimony and published it as a booklet that summer. It sold out quickly before being seized from newsstands by angry protesters and Columbus police. The trial became a media sensation. Crowds gathered at the courthouse as early as 3 a.m. to secure seats. The jury consisted of 11 men and 1 woman. During final arguments, Snook's wife and mother, who had avoided the courtroom during his explicit testimony, sat beside him and held his hands. They remained beside him as Judge Scarlett charged the jury. On August 14, 1929, after deliberating for only 28 minutes, the jury returned a verdict of guilty of first-degree murder. Judge Scarlett sentenced James Snook to death by electrocution. Snook's attorneys filed appeals to the Ohio Supreme Court, which were denied. A petition for clemency to the governor was also rejected. The United States Supreme Court declined to hear the case. In the weeks before his execution, Snook confessed to the warden at the Ohio Penitentiary that his trial testimony had been fabricated. He admitted that the murder was premeditated and that the temporary insanity defense was false. On February 28, 1930, at 7 p.m., James Snook was executed in the electric chair at the Ohio Penitentiary on West Spring Street in Columbus. His last meal consisted of fried chicken, lamb chops, mashed potatoes, ice cream, and coffee. He was strapped into the chair and subjected to 2,000 volts of electricity over the course of 3 minutes. An international news service reporter who witnessed the execution wrote that Snook's fists drew up in knots and his bald head blistered terribly from the heat. Thin wisps of smoke curled up from the electrodes on his head and leg. The smell of burned human flesh pervaded the chamber. About 40 people had crowded in to watch him die. Following a brief pre-dawn service conducted by Reverend Isaac Miller of the King Avenue Methodist Church, Snook was given a private burial at Green Lawn Cemetery in Columbus. His headstone reads only James Howard, 1879 to 1930. The surname Snook was not included. For decades, the cemetery office refused to disclose the location of his burial site. That information was not released until 2005. His wife, Helen Marple, remained in Columbus and died in 1978. James Snook was 49 years old at the time of his execution. He remains the only United States Olympic gold medalist ever executed for murder. The trial captivated the nation and became one of the most sordid courtroom dramas of the 20th century. The Snook hook, the surgical instrument he invented, is still used in veterinary practices around the world, a legacy completely divorced from the crime that ended his life. His name was erased from his own gravestone, a final rejection by a community that had once celebrated him as a hero. The case stands as a reminder that Olympic glory and professional achievement cannot erase the consequences of violence. Case 3. O.J. Simpson. On the night of June 12, 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman were found brutally murdered outside Nicole's condominium in Brentwood, Los Angeles. The crime scene was horrific, multiple stab wounds, signs of a violent struggle, and blood evidence that pointed to someone they both knew. Within days, suspicion centered on one man, Orenthal James Simpson, better known to the world as O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson was not just a former athlete. He was one of the most recognizable figures in America. A Heisman Trophy winner at USC, a Hall of Fame NFL running back, and later a successful actor and broadcaster, Simpson had built a public image that transcended sports. He was charismatic, widely loved, and seen as a symbol of success. That image would collapse overnight. Nicole Brown Simpson, 35, had been married to O.J. Simpson for 7 years before their divorce in 1992. Their relationship had been marked by repeated incidents of domestic violence. Police had been called to their home multiple times. Nicole had documented abuse, and friends later testified that she feared for her life. Ron Goldman, 25, was a restaurant waiter and friend of Nicole's who had come to return a pair of glasses the night he was killed. He had no connection to Simpson beyond that moment. On June 17, 1994, 5 days after the murders, O.J. Simpson was scheduled to turn himself in to police. Instead, he fled. What followed was one of the most surreal moments in American history. A slow-speed police chase broadcast live across the country. Simpson was in the back seat of a white Ford Bronco, driven by his friend Al Cowlings, holding a gun to his head. Millions of viewers watched as police followed the vehicle along Los Angeles freeways. The chase ended peacefully at Simpson's home, where he surrendered. The trial began in January 1995 and quickly became a media spectacle unlike anything seen before. Prosecutors presented DNA evidence, blood samples, and a history of domestic violence. The defense team, led by high-profile attorneys, challenged the handling of evidence and accused law enforcement of misconduct and racial bias. One of the most famous moments came when Simpson tried on a pair of gloves allegedly worn during the murders. They appeared too small, leading to the defense's now famous line, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." After months of testimony and global media coverage, the jury delivered its verdict on October 3, 1995. O.J. Simpson was found not guilty of the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. The decision shocked millions and remains one of the most controversial verdicts in legal history. In 1997, a civil trial found Simpson liable for the wrongful deaths of Nicole and Goldman. He was ordered to pay $33.5 million in damages to their families. Though he avoided prison for the murders, his life never returned to what it had been. In 2007, Simpson was arrested again, this time in Las Vegas, for armed robbery and kidnapping related to a dispute over sports memorabilia. In 2008, he was convicted and sentenced to 33 years in prison. He was granted parole in 2017 after serving 9 years. O.J. Simpson, once celebrated as one of the greatest athletes in American history, became a symbol of controversy, violence, and the failures of the justice system. The murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman remain a defining moment in American culture. His fall from grace was not just dramatic. It was one of the most widely witnessed in history. Case 4. Henry Tillman. The man who shot Leon Milton in the chest outside a Los Angeles nightclub in February 2000 was the same man who had defeated Mike Tyson twice as an amateur boxer and won an Olympic gold medal at the 1984 Summer Olympics. Henry Tillman's boxing career had been built on those victories over Tyson, and his gold medal performance in Los Angeles had made him a celebrated figure in the sport. By the time he pulled the trigger outside that nightclub, Tillman's life had spiraled into legal trouble and financial instability. The post-boxing years had been hard, marked by arrests for credit card fraud and mounting debt. The argument that escalated into gunfire was the culmination of a life that had gone badly off course. Leon Milton, a 33-year-old nightclub patron, was dead, and Henry Tillman was facing a murder charge. Henry Tillman was born in 1960 and grew up in Los Angeles. He became an amateur boxer and gained national attention when he defeated a young Mike Tyson twice in amateur competition. Those victories propelled him into the spotlight and earned him a spot on the United States Olympic boxing team. At the 1984 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles, Tillman won the gold medal in the heavyweight division, cementing his place in boxing history. After the Olympics, Tillman turned professional, but his career in the paid ranks never lived up to the promise of his amateur success. He struggled to find the same level of achievement and eventually retired from boxing. The transition from athlete to civilian was difficult. Tillman faced financial problems and became involved in criminal activity. He was convicted of credit card fraud and served time. By 2000, at the age of 39, Tillman was far removed from the glory of his Olympic triumph. Leon Millen, a 33-year-old nightclub patron, had the misfortune of being present when an argument turned violent. Little is publicly known about his background, but he was a man who found himself in the wrong place when Henry Tillman decided to settle a conflict with a gun. In February 2000, Henry Tillman was involved in a heated argument outside a nightclub in Los Angeles. The details of the dispute have not been fully documented, but the confrontation escalated quickly. Tillman pulled out a firearm and shot Leon Milton in the chest. Milton died from the gunshot wound. Witnesses at the scene identified Tillman as the shooter. He fled the scene but was later tracked down by the Los Angeles Police Department. Tillman was arrested and charged with murder. The case drew attention not because of the circumstances of the crime, which were tragically common, but because the accused was an Olympic gold medalist whose name had once been synonymous with victory. The Los Angeles Police Department investigated the shooting and gathered witness statements identifying Henry Tillman as the shooter. He was arrested and charged with murder. Tillman faced the possibility of a life sentence if convicted. Prosecutors presented evidence that Tillman had shot Leon Milton during an argument outside the nightclub and had fled the scene. The case moved forward, and Tillman was forced to confront the reality of spending the rest of his life in prison. Rather than proceed to trial and risk a conviction for murder, Henry Tillman accepted a plea deal. In 2001, he pleaded no contest to a charge of voluntary manslaughter. By pleading no contest, Tillman avoided admitting guilt but accepted the consequences of a conviction. The plea deal allowed him to avoid a life sentence, but it came with a significant prison term. Tillman was given 6 years in state prison. The sentence was far less than what he would have faced if convicted of murder, but it marked the end of any remaining public goodwill Tillman had earned through his boxing career. At 64, Henry Tillman has long since left prison behind. He killed Leon Milton during an argument in February 2000 and served 6 years in prison for voluntary manslaughter. His case became emblematic of the struggles faced by many combat sports athletes who transitioned to civilian life without adequate support systems. The glory of the 1984 Olympics and the victories over Mike Tyson are footnotes to a story that ended in violence and incarceration. Leon Milton was 33 years old when he was shot and killed. His life was taken by a man who had once been celebrated as a champion. Case 5. Oscar Pistorius. 4 gunshots fired through a locked bathroom door on Valentine's Day, 2013, killed Riva Steenkamp and shattered the legacy of Oscar Pistorius, the double amputee sprinter known worldwide as the Blade Runner. Pistorius had made history by becoming the first amputee to compete in both the Paralympics and the Olympics, running on carbon fiber prosthetic blades that became his trademark. He was a global inspiration, a man who had overcome physical limitations to achieve what many believed impossible. On the morning of February 14, 2013, at his home in a gated community in Pretoria, South Africa, Pistorius fired his 9mm pistol 4 times through the bathroom door. He claimed he thought an intruder was hiding inside. The evidence told a different story. Riva Steenkamp, a 29-year-old model and law graduate, was dead. Pistorius was arrested and charged with premeditated murder. The trial that followed became one of the most watched legal proceedings in the world. Oscar Pistorius was born on November 22, 1986, in Pretoria, South Africa. He was born without fibulas in both legs, and his lower legs were amputated below the knee when he was 11 months old. He grew up using prosthetic legs and took up running as a teenager. He competed using carbon fiber running blades designed specifically for amputee athletes. Pistorius became a Paralympic champion, winning multiple gold medals. In 2012, he made history by competing in the London Olympics alongside able-bodied athletes, becoming the first double amputee to do so. He ran in both the 400-meter individual event and the 4x400-meter relay. His achievement was celebrated around the world. Pistorius was seen as a symbol of perseverance and determination. Sponsors lined up to work with him, and he became one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet. He was 26 years old in February 2013 and dating Reeva Steenkamp. To the public, his life appeared charmed. In private, there were signs of trouble. Reeva Steenkamp was 29 years old. She had graduated with a law degree and had built a successful career as a model and reality television personality. She was intelligent, ambitious, and well-liked. She and Oscar Pistorius had been dating for several months. On the night of February 13th, 2013, she was staying at his home in the Silver Woods gated estate in Pretoria. She had her whole life ahead of her. By the early morning hours of February 14th, she was dead, killed by the man she had been sleeping beside. In the early morning hours of February 14th, 2013, Oscar Pistorius woke up in his bedroom. He later testified that he heard a noise coming from the bathroom and believed an intruder had entered his home. Without turning on the lights or confirming who was in the bathroom, Pistorius retrieved his 9mm pistol from under his bed. He walked to the bathroom door and fired 4 shots through it. Reeva Steenkamp was on the other side of the door. She was struck by 3 of the bullets. 1 hit her in the head. She died almost immediately. Pistorius called for help, but it was too late. When police arrived, they found Reeva's body in the bathroom. Pistorius claimed he had thought she was still in bed and that he had believed an intruder was in the bathroom. Investigators were skeptical. The forensic evidence did not support his version of events. Blood spatter patterns and bullet trajectories indicated that Reeva had been standing facing the door when the shots were fired, suggesting she may have been trying to escape or hide from Pistorius. The prosecution's theory was that the couple had been arguing and that Pistorius had shot Reeva in a fit of rage. Pistorius was arrested and charged with premeditated murder. The trial began in 2014 and was broadcast live around the world. The courtroom proceedings were intensely watched. Pistorius took the stand and testified that the shooting had been a tragic accident, that he had genuinely believed an intruder was in the bathroom, and that he had acted out of fear. The prosecution argued that Pistorius had killed Reeva intentionally during a domestic dispute. Forensic experts testified about the blood spatter, the bullet trajectories, and the positions of Reeva's body. Witnesses described hearing shouting and screaming before the gunshots. In September 2014, Judge Thokozile Masipa found Pistorius guilty of culpable homicide, the South African equivalent of manslaughter, rather than murder. She sentenced him to 5 years in prison. The prosecution appealed the verdict, arguing that the judge had erred in her application of the law. In December 2015, the Supreme Court of Appeal overturned the culpable homicide conviction and found Pistorius guilty of murder. The court ruled that Pistorius had fired his weapon, knowing that whoever was behind the door would likely be killed, and that this constituted murder regardless of whether he knew it was Riva. In July 2016, Pistorius was sentenced to 6 years in prison for murder. The prosecution again appealed, arguing that the sentence was too lenient. In November 2017, the sentence was increased to 13 years and 5 months. Pistorius was incarcerated and began serving his sentence. In January 2024, after serving more than half of his sentence, Pistorius was granted parole. He was released from prison and placed under strict monitoring conditions that will remain in effect until 2029. Oscar Pistorius, now 38, was released on parole on January 5th, 2024, and is living under strict supervision. Riva Steenkamp was 29 years old when she was killed. Her family has stated that no amount of justice can bring her back. The case ignited intense discussions in South Africa about domestic violence, gender-based violence, and the treatment of women. Pistorius went from being a global inspiration to a convicted murderer. His legacy as the Blade Runner who made history at the Olympics has been completely overshadowed by the fact that he killed Riva Steenkamp on Valentine's Day, 2013. Case 6. Tim Montgomery. The former 100-meter world record holder and 2000 Olympic gold medalist was arrested in Virginia on federal charges of bank fraud and heroin distribution. Tim Montgomery had once been the fastest man in the world. His name had been etched in track and field history. By 2008, his athletic career had been destroyed by the Balco steroid scandal. His medals had been stripped, and his endorsements had evaporated. Financial ruin drove him to crime. Montgomery participated in a multi-million-dollar bank fraud and check kiting scheme. And when that was not enough, he was caught dealing more than 100 grams of heroin. The fall from Olympic glory to federal prison was one of the most catastrophic in the history of track and field. Tim Montgomery was born in 1975 and grew up in the United States. He became a world-class sprinter and competed in the 2000 Summer Olympics in Sydney, where he won a gold medal as part of the United States 4x100-meter relay team. In 2002, Montgomery set a world record in the 100-meter dash. He was at the peak of his career, celebrated as one of the fastest men on the planet. His personal life was also in the spotlight. He was in a relationship with Marion Jones, another track star who had won 5 medals at the 2000 Olympics. Together, they were one of the most high-profile couples in sports. Montgomery's success, however, was built on a foundation of deception. In the mid-2000s, the Balco steroid scandal erupted, exposing widespread doping among elite athletes. Montgomery was implicated. Investigators found evidence that he had used performance-enhancing drugs throughout his career. In 2005, Montgomery was banned from competition, and his world record was erased. He was stripped of his achievements. The endorsements that had made him wealthy disappeared. By the time he turned 30, Montgomery was financially ruined and facing a future with no clear path forward. He turned to crime. The victims of Tim Montgomery's crimes were financial institutions and the communities affected by heroin distribution. There were no individual victims whose names are publicly known in the traditional sense. But the damage Montgomery caused was real. The bank fraud scheme defrauded institutions out of millions of dollars. The heroin he sold contributed to the opioid crisis that has devastated families and neighborhoods across the United States. Between 2005 and 2008, Tim Montgomery became involved in a multi-million-dollar bank fraud and check kiting scheme. The operation involved depositing fraudulent checks into accounts and withdrawing funds before the checks could be identified as fake. Montgomery worked with co-conspirators to move money through the system and extract cash. The scheme lasted for several years and defrauded banks out of significant sums. When that operation began to unravel, Montgomery escalated his criminal activity. He began dealing heroin. In 2008, federal agents caught him in possession of more than 100 grams of heroin, a quantity that indicated intent to distribute rather than personal use. Montgomery was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit bank fraud and conspiracy to distribute heroin. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Federal wiretaps, informants, and financial records documented his involvement in both schemes. Federal investigators used wiretaps and informants to track Tim Montgomery's criminal activity. The Drug Enforcement Administration ran a sting operation that led to his arrest on heroin distribution charges. Financial investigators traced the fraudulent checks and identified Montgomery as a central figure in the bank fraud scheme. He was taken into custody and charged with multiple federal crimes. The case attracted media attention not because of the nature of the crimes, which were unfortunately common, but because the defendant was a former Olympic gold medalist and world record holder. In 2008, Tim Montgomery stood before a federal judge and pleaded guilty to both the bank fraud charges and the heroin distribution charges. By pleading guilty, he avoided a trial and likely received a somewhat reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation. Montgomery received 46 months in federal prison for the bank fraud and an additional 60 months for the heroin distribution. The sentences were to be served consecutively, meaning Montgomery would spend a total of nearly 9 years in federal custody. He was incarcerated and began serving his time. Tim Montgomery, now 49, went from being a world record holder, an Olympic gold medalist, to a convicted felon serving time in federal prison for bank fraud and heroin distribution. His case is one of the most catastrophic falls from grace in track and field history, combining the Balco doping scandal with organized fraud and hard narcotics. The financial desperation that followed the loss of his medals and endorsements drove him to commit crimes that landed him in federal prison. He has since attempted to rebuild his life, but the stain of his criminal record is permanent. Case 7. Marion Jones. On the courthouse steps in October 2007, Marion Jones stood before a crowd of reporters and cameras, tears streaming down her face, and confessed that she had lied to federal agents about using performance-enhancing drugs. The 5-time Olympic medalist, who had dominated the track at the 2000 Sydney Games, admitted that she had taken steroids and that she had been involved in a check fraud scheme. The tearful confession became one of the most iconic and viral media moments of the 2000s. Within weeks, Marion Jones was sentenced to 6 months in federal prison. Her 5 Olympic medals were stripped. Her records were erased. The woman who had once been celebrated as the fastest woman in the world became a symbol of the consequences of doping and deception. Marion Jones was born on October 12, 1975. She grew up in the United States and became one of the most successful track and field athletes in history. At the 2000 Summer Olympics in Sydney, Jones won 5 medals, 3 gold and 2 bronze. She won gold in the 100-meter dash, the 200-meter dash, and the 4x400-meter relay. She won bronze in the long jump and the 4x100-meter relay. Her performance made her one of the most celebrated athletes in the world. Endorsement deals followed, and Jones became a household name. She was briefly married to shot putter C.J. Hunter, and later became involved in a relationship with Tim Montgomery, another track star who would also fall from grace in the Balco scandal. By the mid-2000s, however, Jones's achievements were under scrutiny. Federal investigators had begun looking into the Balco laboratory, which had been supplying performance-enhancing drugs to elite athletes. Jones's name came up repeatedly. She denied using drugs, and she lied to federal agents when they questioned her. That lie would eventually destroy her career. The victims of Marion Jones's crimes were the federal investigators she lied to and the financial institutions defrauded in a check counterfeiting scheme. Jones had been involved with Tim Montgomery, who orchestrated a massive check fraud operation. Fraudulent checks were deposited into accounts controlled by Montgomery and his associates, including Jones. The scheme defrauded banks and financial institutions out of significant sums. When federal agents questioned Jones about her involvement, she lied. When they asked her about her use of performance-enhancing drugs, she lied again. Those lies became federal crimes. Marion Jones's criminal activity unfolded over several years. She used a designer steroid known as the Clear, which had been developed by the Balco laboratory, specifically to evade drug testing. The steroid was undetectable by standard tests at the time, which allowed Jones and other athletes to use it without being caught. Federal investigators eventually uncovered the Balco operation and began interviewing athletes. When Jones was questioned, she denied using any banned substances. She signed statements swearing that she had never used performance-enhancing drugs. She lied. At the same time, Jones was involved in a check fraud scheme run by Tim Montgomery. Fraudulent checks were deposited into her bank accounts, and she benefited financially from the proceeds. When investigators began looking into the fraud, Jones again lied to federal agents about her involvement. The lies caught up with her. In 2007, facing overwhelming evidence, Jones decided to come clean. On October 5, 2007, Marion Jones stood on the steps of a federal courthouse and confessed to lying to federal agents. She admitted that she had used the Clear during the 2000 Olympics and that she had lied about it. She admitted her involvement in the check fraud scheme. With tears streaming down her face, she apologized to her family, her fans, and the public. The confession was broadcast live and became one of the defining images of the doping era in sports. Jones pleaded guilty to 2 counts of lying to federal investigators. The charges carried the possibility of significant prison time. In January 2008, Marion Jones was sentenced to 6 months in federal prison. She was also ordered to complete 400 hours of community service. The judge could have imposed a much harsher sentence, but Jones's cooperation and her public confession were taken into account. Jones served her 6-month sentence in 2008 and was released. The International Olympic Committee stripped her of all 5 medals she had won in Sydney. Her records were erased. She was banned from competition. Her endorsements were gone. The woman who had once been the face of women's track and field was left with nothing but the consequences of her choices. Marion Jones, now 48, served 6 months in federal prison for lying to federal agents about using performance-enhancing drugs and her involvement in a check fraud scheme. Her 5 Olympic medals were stripped. Her records were erased. The tearful confession she made on the courthouse steps in October 2007 became one of the most iconic viral media moments of the 2000s and forever changed the landscape of anti-doping enforcement in Olympic sports. Her fall from grace was complete, public, and permanent. Case 8. Matti Nykänen. In August 2004, police in Nokia, Finland, arrested a heavily intoxicated man who had just stabbed a 59-year-old family friend in the back with a 6-inch blade. The altercation had erupted after the 2 men had been drinking and playing a finger-pulling game. The attacker was Matti Nykänen, widely considered the greatest male ski jumper in history, and a multiple Olympic gold medalist. By 2004, Nykänen was 41 years old, and his life had been consumed by severe alcoholism and erratic behavior. The stabbing was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of violence and self-destruction that would define Nykkänen's post-Olympic years and eventually kill him. He was convicted of aggravated assault and attempted manslaughter and sentenced to prison. Days after his release, he was arrested again for abusing his wife. Matti Nyckanen's story became a tragic case study of how unmanaged addiction and mental health issues can destroy a national icon. Matti Nyckanen was born in 1963 in Finland and became a ski jumping phenomenon. He won multiple Olympic gold medals and world championship titles throughout the 1980s and is widely regarded as the greatest male ski jumper of all time. His technical skill and consistency on the slopes made him a national hero in Finland. After retiring from competition, however, Nyckanen struggled to find his footing. He had no clear career path and no support system to help him transition to civilian life. He turned to alcohol, and his drinking spiraled out of control. Over the years, he became known not for his athletic achievements, but for his drunken public behavior, his tumultuous relationships, and his frequent run-ins with the law. By his early 40s, Nyckanen was a shadow of the champion he had once been. The man Nyckanen stabbed was a 59-year-old family friend who had been drinking with him at a cabin in Nokia, Finland. The two had been playing a finger-pulling game, a simple contest of strength often played while drinking. His name has not been widely publicized, likely to protect his privacy. On an August evening in 2004, Matti Nyckanen and a 59-year-old acquaintance were drinking at a cabin in Nokia, Finland. The two men had been playing a finger-pulling game, a drinking contest that involved pulling on each other's fingers to see who was stronger. Nyckanen lost. He became angry. In a sudden fit of rage, he grabbed a knife and stabbed the man in the back. The blade was 6 inches long, and the wound was serious. The victim was rushed to a hospital and survived, but the injury was severe enough to warrant criminal charges. Police arrived at the scene and found Nyckanen heavily intoxicated. He was arrested on the spot and charged with aggravated assault and attempted manslaughter. Matti Nyckanen was held in custody and charged with aggravated assault and attempted manslaughter. The evidence was clear: the victim's wound, the knife, and Nyckanen's intoxicated state at the time of his arrest left no doubt about what had happened. Nyckanen's defense attorneys argued that he had been in an alcohol-induced blackout and that he could not remember the attack. The argument did little to mitigate the severity of the crime. The victim had been stabbed in the back with a 6-inch blade, and Nyckanen had been the one holding the knife. The trial took place in late 2004. Matti Nyckanen was found guilty of aggravated assault and attempted manslaughter. Nyckanen received 26 months in prison. He was incarcerated and began serving his sentence. He was released after serving approximately 1 year, having been granted probation. The expectation was that Nyckanen would use his time on probation to address his alcoholism and rebuild his life. Instead, he was arrested again just days after his release for abusing his wife. The cycle of violence and self-destruction continued. Matti Nyckanen never recovered from his addiction. Over the following years, he continued to struggle with alcoholism and legal troubles. His personal life was chaotic, marked by multiple marriages, divorces, and incidents of domestic violence. In 2019, Matti Nyckanen died from alcohol-related illnesses. He was 55 years old. His death marked the end of a life that had once been filled with Olympic glory, but had descended into tragedy. The man who had once soared through the air as the greatest ski jumper in history spent his final years consumed by addiction and unable to escape the demons that had plagued him since retirement. Matti Nyckanen died in 2019 at the age of 55 from alcohol-related illnesses. He had been one of the greatest ski jumpers in history, a multiple Olympic gold medalist, and a national hero in Finland. His post-retirement life was defined by severe alcoholism, violence, and legal troubles. The stabbing of a 59-year-old man during a drunken finger-pulling game was just one incident in a long pattern of self-destructive behavior. Nyckanen's story is a tragic case study of how unmanaged addiction and mental health issues can destroy even the most celebrated athletes. The man who once flew through the air with grace and precision died alone, broken by the very demons he could never outrun. Case 9. Ronaldo Nehemiah. On the surface, Ronaldo Nehemiah was one of the greatest hurdlers in history. A world record holder in the 110-meter hurdles, he dominated track and field in the late 1970s and early 1980s. He later transitioned into professional football, playing as a wide receiver in the NFL. His speed and athleticism made him a standout. But after his athletic career ended, Nehemiah became entangled in a financial crime that would stain his legacy. In the 2000s, Nehemiah became involved in a large-scale investment fraud scheme targeting professional athletes and high-net-worth individuals. Alongside associates, he helped promote fraudulent investment opportunities that promised high returns but were built on deception. Millions of dollars were funneled through these schemes, with victims including former athletes who trusted Nehemiah because of his reputation. Federal investigators uncovered the operation after multiple complaints from investors who had lost substantial sums. Financial records revealed a pattern of misrepresentation, false promises, and misuse of funds. The case was built on documented transactions, witness testimony, and communications that tied Nehemiah directly to the scheme. Nehemiah was eventually charged in connection with fraud-related offenses. The case exposed how trust built through athletic fame could be exploited for financial gain. While he was never known for violence, the scale of the deception and the financial damage inflicted on victims made the case deeply shocking. Ronaldo Nehemiah, once celebrated as one of the fastest hurdlers in the world, became a cautionary example of how quickly a respected legacy can unravel. His achievements on the track remain part of history, but they are now inseparable from the financial crimes that followed. Case 10. Ryan Wedding. On January 22, 2026, Ryan Wedding turned himself in to authorities in Mexico City after more than a decade in hiding. The 44-year-old former Olympic snowboarder had been added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list in March 2025, with a reward of $15 million for his capture. Federal prosecutors had charged Wedding with leading a transnational cocaine trafficking organization responsible for moving approximately 60 metric tons of cocaine annually, generating $1 billion in drug proceeds, and ordering multiple murders, including the execution of a federal witness. Law enforcement officials compared Wedding to Pablo Escobar and Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. The man who had once represented Canada at the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City, finishing 24th in the parallel giant slalom snowboarding event, had allegedly become one of the most dangerous drug traffickers in North America. The arrest brought an end to one of the most extreme escalations from Olympic athlete to alleged cartel boss in history. Ryan James Wedding was born on September 14, 1981, in Thunder Bay, Ontario. His maternal grandparents owned the Mount Baldy ski resort in Thunder Bay, and his uncle was the director of a ski school and coach of the Canadian women's national alpine ski team. Wedding's father was an engineer and former competitive skier who moved the family to Coquitlam, British Columbia, when Ryan was 12 years old. Wedding began snowboarding and quickly excelled. He won the first race he entered and made the Canadian national ski team at the age of 15. He won a bronze medal in the parallel giant slalom at the 1999 Junior World Championships and a silver medal at the 2001 Junior World Championships. At the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City, Wedding competed for Team Canada in the men's parallel giant slalom event. He finished in 24th place. After the Olympics, Wedding gave up competitive snowboarding. He enrolled at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver and took a job as a bouncer at a nightclub. He dropped out of university after 2 years and began speculating in real estate. To finance his ventures, Wedding started growing marijuana. In 2006, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police raided a property called 18 Carat Farms and discovered a 6,800 plant marijuana warehouse, a shotgun, ammunition, and $10 million worth of cannabis. Wedding was not immediately arrested, but the operation marked the beginning of his criminal career. In June 2008, Wedding and 2 associates traveled from Canada to San Diego, California, to buy cocaine as part of a Vancouver-based drug trafficking organization. He was arrested and charged with conspiracy to possess with intent to distribute cocaine. In 2010, Wedding pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 4 years in a United States federal prison. He was released in 2011. According to federal prosecutors, Wedding's transnational cocaine trafficking enterprise began not later than 2011, the year he was released from prison. The alleged victims of Ryan Wedding's crimes include multiple individuals murdered on his orders and the communities devastated by the cocaine his organization allegedly trafficked. On November 20th, 2023, Jagtar Sidhu, 57, and Harbhajan Sidhu, 55, were shot and killed in Caledon, Ontario, in what prosecutors describe as retaliation for a stolen drug shipment that had passed through Southern California. A third member of the family survived the attack with serious injuries. On April 1st, 2024, Randy Fader, 29, was allegedly murdered in Ontario. On May 18th, 2024, Mohammed Zafar, 39, was allegedly killed over a drug debt. On January 31st, 2025, a federal witness who was scheduled to testify against Wedding in a narcotics case was shot 5 times in the head at a restaurant in Medellin, Colombia. Prosecutors allege that Wedding placed a bounty on the witness and enlisted others to locate and kill him. The witness's wife was also targeted. All of these individuals, according to the indictments, were killed to further the aims of Wedding's alleged criminal enterprise. Federal prosecutors allege that beginning in 2011, Ryan Wedding operated a continuing criminal enterprise that shipped massive quantities of cocaine from Colombia through Mexico to Southern California, and then to Canada. The cocaine was transported in long-haul semi-trucks driven by couriers working for a Canada-based transportation network. The operation allegedly moved approximately 60 metric tons of cocaine per year and generated roughly $1 billion in annual revenue. Wedding allegedly used cryptocurrency to launder the proceeds and conceal the operation's financial activities. He operated under multiple aliases, including El Jefe, Giant, Public Enemy, James Conrad King, Jesse King, El Toro, and Boss. According to prosecutors, Wedding resorted to violence to eliminate threats and advance his enterprise's interests. The murders in Ontario in November 2023 were allegedly ordered in retaliation for a stolen drug shipment. The killing of the federal witness in Colombia in January 2025 was allegedly ordered to prevent the witness from testifying against Wedding. Prosecutors claim that Wedding's attorney, Deepak Paradkar, advised Wedding that if he killed the witness, the criminal charges in the narcotics case would be dropped. Paradkar was arrested and charged in connection with the witness's murder. On October 17, 2024, federal prosecutors in the Central District of California released a 16-count superseding indictment charging Ryan Wedding, his second-in-command Andrew Clark, and 14 other co-defendants with running and participating in a transnational drug trafficking operation. The charges included leading a continuing criminal enterprise, cocaine trafficking, murder in connection with a continuing criminal enterprise, and attempted murder. Andrew Clark, a 34-year-old Canadian, was arrested in Mexico in October 2024. He was among 29 fugitives extradited from Mexico to the United States and has pleaded not guilty. His trial is scheduled to begin in February 2026. On November 19, 2025, a new federal indictment was unsealed, charging Wedding with ordering the murder of the federal witness in Colombia. 18 additional defendants, including Wedding's attorney Deepak Paradkar, were charged in connection with the witness's death. On March 6, 2025, Wedding was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. The United States Department of State offered a reward of $10 million for information leading to his arrest. In November 2025, the reward was increased to $15 million. The United States Department of the Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control sanctioned Wedding and others closely associated with him, cutting them off from financial accounts in the United States. Federal officials stated that Wedding was believed to be hiding in Mexico under the protection of the Sinaloa cartel. On January 22, 2026, Ryan Wedding turned himself in to authorities in Mexico City. He was handed over to the FBI and placed in United States federal custody on January 23, 2026. He was flown to Ontario, California, where he is expected to appear in federal court in February 2026. FBI Director Kash Patel stated that Wedding had been apprehended and would face justice. United States Attorney General Pamela Bondi announced the arrest and described Wedding as controlling one of the most prolific and violent drug trafficking organizations in the world. Akil Davis, the assistant director in charge of the FBI's Los Angeles field office, stated that Wedding's organization had been responsible for shipping about 60 metric tons of cocaine through Southern California and for orchestrating multiple murders of victims and government witnesses. Davis added that the arrest brought justice to the families Wedding had tormented. So far, authorities have arrested 36 people allegedly connected to Wedding's organization. Wedding faces multiple federal charges, including running a continuing criminal enterprise, committing murder in connection with a continuing criminal enterprise, cocaine trafficking, and murder of a federal witness. If convicted on the continuing criminal enterprise charge, Wedding faces a mandatory minimum penalty of life in federal prison. The murder and attempted murder charges carry mandatory minimum penalties of 20 years in federal prison. Ryan Wedding, 44, is currently in United States federal custody and is expected to stand trial in February 2026. He is accused of leading a transnational cocaine trafficking organization that moved 60 metric tons of cocaine annually, generated $1 billion in drug proceeds, and ordered multiple murders, including the execution of a federal witness. Federal officials have compared him to Pablo Escobar and El Chapo. If convicted, Wedding will never see freedom again. The man who finished 24th in the parallel giant slalom at the 2002 Winter Olympics is now facing charges that could result in multiple life sentences. The case represents the most extreme escalation from Olympic athlete to alleged cartel boss in history. Wedding's snowboarding career ended 2 decades ago. His alleged criminal empire may have just ended as well.